Hey folks, what's up? Welcome to this video where we are going to learn how to fetch data with React Query. So in this video, we're going to build this. So we're going to have one page, a dashboard page component, and that will contain two components, the users component and the user component. And each of those components will use their own React Query hook, which we are going to make to fetch the data. And we're going to start with the users component. So before that, we need to set up React Query. Again, if you haven't installed it yet, you can simply do so by saying npm install React Query. And for this video, we will also be using Axios, but I already have it installed, so I'm good to go. So it's pretty easy to set up React Query. As you can see right here, it essentially requires you to do 3 steps. So first of all, we want to wrap the children of the app component in a query client provider. So we will of course have a dashboard component soon, but for now we'll just do a p tag. And what I will do right here, I will create a query client provider that comes from React Query. So I will say import query client provider from React Query, like so. And we would wrap all the children in there. And then next up, we want to create a query client by using new query client. So I can say const query client is new query client. There we go. Just like that. And then we want to pass that query client as a client property to the query client provider. So I can simply pass query client right there. Awesome. So now let's create the dashboard page component and the users component together with the use users React Query hook. So I will create a new folder called pages, and in there we will have a dashboard component. Like so. And I will render that right here. So we'll take a look if that is actually working. Okay, awesome. There we got our dashboard. And then inside that dashboard component, let's say we want to render the users component, which is not yet existing. So let's create a new folder, call it components. And this will be called users.jsx. Like that. And now in the dashboard component, we are going to render the users component. Let's do it like this. Import users from components users. Perfect. So now it will render users. So now we're going to make our first hook. And I'm going to make again a new folder in our source folder, and I will call it query hooks. So this is where all our React Query hooks will go. And well, in this component, I actually want to fetch all the users. So I'm going to call this use users.jsx. Great. So the first thing I want to do is just our Axios call. So I will say const fetch users, which will take an arrow function, and then we will make a get request with Axios, and we're going to use JSON placeholder for this. So I'll just search for JSON placeholder, and I'm going to use this endpoint right here, which will fetch 10 users. So I will pass that, and then we want to take the data from the response we're getting, right? So I will say dot then, and then return response dot data. So the next thing we want to do is to create our actual, and I see I made a typo right here. This should be use users and not user users, like that. So now we're going to create the actual use users function. So I will say export default function, and we will call this use users. And now if we want to fetch data with React Query, we have to use the use query hook. So I will say return use query. And right here, and I will just go back to the slides. Well, as you can see, we just created the fetch function, and then we need to let it return use query with the query key and the actual fetch function, which in our case is fetch users. Now the query key is essentially a unique identifier for React Query to manage the cache in your application. So in this case, we're going to fetch the users, so I will simply call it users. That will be our unique key. And then as a second argument, we want to pass the fetch users function, just like that. So I will save this and I will close this file right here. And I can close dashboard for now as well. And now we can actually make use of this, this hook. So I could say const users is use, like the hook we just created, which is use users. And it seems that it's not able to find it, but I'll just say import use users from query hooks use users. So now let's console log users and take a look what's actually going on. So I'm gonna open up my DevTools. All right, so we'll save the file, and as you can see, it made the request right here. As you see, we got a successful response from JSON placeholder with all the users. And now when I go to my console, you will see we have two console logs. And what you see right here is essentially provided by React Query. So React Query is going to handle the fetch status, so to speak, for you. And as you can see right here, we have status loading, and we see that data is undefined, right? And we can see also that, for example, is fetching is set to true, and is loading is set to true. On the other hand, you will see that is success is set to false. And then at the second console log right here, you will see that is success will be true. And now we will have the data object in here with our user. So what we could say right here is, and it's always a good practice if you're fetching data, generally speaking, there are three outcomes that can occur. The first one is that your request will succeed. The second one is that your request could fail. And of course, you also have a third phase, which is actually the first one, which is where your fetch is loading. So what I could say if users dot is loading is true, then I want to render a paragraph tag that says loading users. And if, let's say, users is error, so if the fetch failed, we could say could not fetch users. And if the fetch succeeded, we can say if users dot is success, and this will actually be determined by the response status of the server. It will return, well, let's list these users. So I can say return an ordered list of list items, and then it's going to map over the users dot data, and we'll say dot map, and then we take a user and we will return. And of course, this is not going to work because we actually want to return the list item. So just like that, I'll put it on a new line to make it extra clear what's going on. And let's say we want to return from the user their, let's take it, look, let's return their name. Perfect. So now when I will save this file, you will see that we got our list of users. So this is working. Now, the next thing I'd like to show you is how we can make, let's say, an individual request to fetch one user in specific. And in this case, it wouldn't make a lot of sense because we are already fetching the users, but I'd just like to show you how we would go over this and how we would then work also with the query key to update our React cache or React query cache, so to speak. So I will go back to the dashboard component. So right here, I want to create a new component, which I will call user.jsx. So let's for now return user. Take a look if that's working. Just put a horizontal line in here. Take a look, user. Import that as well. Oops. Actually, I need to copy it. There we go. Okay, so now it's returning user. So now I want to create a new hook, which I will call use user, because we're going to fetch one specific user. So we're essentially going to do the same thing. So I will say const fetch user. And right here we want to, probably take in a user ID, right? And then we want to return axios.get. And then we want to fetch one specific user, which is, let's take a look, https:/JSON placeholder .type code /users, and then right here it will accept the user ID like this, and of course we have to use backticks in order to make this work like that, and then we will return the data object from the response. So we'll take in the response and we return response.data. And now we're going to make and again, I made a typo right here. This should be use user. So I will say export default function use user, which is going to take in the user ID, right? Because this is actually the function we're going to call from our component, and is then actually going to use that fetch user function to actually pass it to our Axios request. And then we want to return the same as we did before, use query. And now we are going to fetch an individual user. So for the key, we want to say that we are going to fetch a specific user, okay? And because we have the specific ID of this user, we can pass it right here as a second value, so to speak. So this is essentially saying, yes, we're going to fetch users, but only the user with this ID. And that will then cause React Query to actually update its state as well if, for example, the user has changed in the meanwhile and the server responds with a different user object. And then right here, because, and this is a little tricky, but now we cannot simply say fetch user and then, for example, passing the user ID, this will not work. So as soon as you want to pass arguments to your fetch function, then you want to use a arrow function like so. So I will save this file and I will go back to our user component. And now here I can make use of that hook by saying const user is use user. And let's import that. Import use user from query hooks use user. And now let's say if we, well, you get the point, right? We can do like the loading state right here and the error state. But for now, I'll just immediately return the actual content or the actual data that comes with user. So I could say if user is success, then return a paragraph tag. And let's see, what are we going to do here? Well, let's return the user.data.name. And let's return some their address as well. For example, their street. Or let's take a look. Yeah, we can return their street as well. So I will actually make use of these backtakes like that, like so. So first we'll have their name, and then for example a dash, and then we're going to grab their street from their address. Awesome. So now the fetch is not working because, as you can see right here, we have undefined because we did not pass a user ID. And what you can see as well is that React Query automatically is trying to refetch a couple of times to make sure that, you know, sometimes the server might be have, you know, for example, have to handle a lot of requests, and then it might not respond with the actual data. So that's why React Query out of the box is trying to refetch. You can disable this, but we will leave that for now. So in order to make this work, I will just simply pass in, let's say, user with ID 5, and they actually made forget to add .com in our hook. So I will go back to the use user hook, and right here this should be typicode.com/users. And now you'll see when I save the user component, it now fetches the individual user successfully. So we get one user, and it's returning the name and the street of this specific user. So now let's spice things up a little bit and take a look how we can like unlock the true power of React Query. And then I'm talking specifically about the caching. So what I will actually do, I will also add the loading state. So I will say user.isLoading, and then display something like loading user, something like that. Awesome. And let's try to build in the feature that whenever we click on a user, we are going to fetch the user right here, right? So if I click right here on Curtis, it should fetch Curtis and show his street name. The same goes for Glenna and so on. So what I will do, I will go back to, let's just close these ones up right here. So let's open up the dashboard component, and let's create some state right here. So it's a const selected user, and this will be set selected user, and by default it will be no. And I'm going to pass the set selected user to the users component, and we are going to destructure it right here. And then we could say, for example, that we on click. And before I do that, we of course should use a key right here as well. So let's take the user ID for that. And let's say we have an on click that will then on click set the selected user to the user.id. So now when I save this and also our dashboard file right here, let's take a look. Null is not iterable. Of course you have to use state right here and not just say null. There we go. So now when I go to my components right here, and I'll go to my dashboard components because that's where our state lives, you'll see that whenever I click on a certain user, the ID will be set. And now we want to make sure that our user component is going to consume that state. So what I will do in the dashboard component, I will pass the selected user down as a prop, just like that. And then I go to the user component itself, destructure it right here. And then instead of saying use user and passing the number 5, we're actually going to pass the user ID. So now you will see that whenever I click on a user, you will see that loading state. And to make this extra clear, I will actually throttle my network, let's say to fast 3G. And now you will see that whenever I click on a user, you will have that loading state. And then right here, you see loading state, and then the user is being fetched. Now, what's nice about React Query is that it is caching those users. So if I now will click again on Clementina, or actually we didn't choose Clementina before. Let's do a full refresh. There we go. So let's first fetch Clementina, and then Glenna, and then Nicolas, and you will see that it's constantly loading. But now whenever I click on Clementina, boom, the data will be immediately there. Glenna, same thing, Nicolas, but you'll see when I click on a new user, it will have that loading state again. And this is actually the caching coming into play. So as soon as I click on Clementina, what React Query is going to do, it's going to actually use the cached value, put it in there, and then it's going to make a new fetch, as you can see. Let's just remove all the network requests. You will see when I click now on Nicolas, you will see the data is immediately there, but we are actually fetching the user. We are actually fetching Nicolas, or yeah, here we go, Nicolas. So that is something React Query is doing out of the box. So it's first is grabbing the value from the cache, and then it's going to, in the background, refetch. And well, if nothing has changed, it will of course just leave the state as it's in the cache right there. But if the server responds with, let's say, a different name or a different address, it will be shown. So to make this a little bit more clear to the user, because the user might not be knowing that there is some background fetching going on, we could implement a sort of loading spinner, or in this case, we're going to do some text to keep it simple. So the user actually knows that we are actually, something is happening with regard to fetching the data. So I can go to the dashboard component, and I will create a new variable right here. I will call it isFetching. And right here, we're going to use the useIsFetching hook from React Query. And then right here, I could, for example, say that if isFetching, then return a paragraph tag. And, probably you want to have something like a loading spinner in here, but to keep things simple, I'll just keep some text. And let's do some inline styles, doing a little dirty right here, same position, fixed, and the top is, let's say, 2%. So I want to have that loading state in the upper corner, in the right upper corner actually, 0% as well. Yeah, like that. So now you will see right here, it will have the loading, the loading state as long as it's fetching, right? So now you'll see when I click on Clementina, for example, you will see that whenever I click on a user, that loading state will appear. And what's nice about this, and actually you'll see right here that it's displaying 0. And in order to prevent this, we should actually say, instead of using the and operator, we can actually say that otherwise it should display null, so nothing. So let's save it. Okay. So now you'll see whenever I click on a user, we have that loading state right up there. But you will see that whenever I now click on Clementina, which is in cache, you will see that loading state. So it becomes apparent for the user that at least something is going on in the background to probably fetch the data. And I think from like a user experience point of view, that's a good thing to do. So fetching data with React Query is not that difficult. In the next video, we're going to make some post requests, which is a little bit more difficult, I'd say, but it's still, you know, pretty easy to use. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.